Hello, this is Malcolm Bowden. I'd like to speak to you on the subjects of mankind, the universe, and the infinity of God. If we look around us, we can see that the enormous benefits that we have obtained from scientific experiments over many hundreds of years. But if we now stand back and take a survey of all that has taken place, we seem to be reaching certain limits at what might be called the extremes of our scientific investigation. In astronomy, we have the huge expanse of space, and the question then arises, is it infinite? Is it limited? And these are questions that mankind can never solve, because the only way he can solve them is to go outside of the universe, and that is not possible during this earthly life. So that is a question that man cannot even begin to answer. At the other end of the scale, what might be called the zero scale, we have atomic particles, and some very strange effects have been found at that end of the scale of experiments that we can make. There is an experiment known as the two-slit experiment, in which light is shone at two slits and are refocused back on a screen behind them. If you shine a bright light at these two slits, then you get a series of bands that are effective and start to appear on the screen behind as the waves and the troughs of the light from the two different slits add together or cancel out, and you get the bands. But then if you shine one single photon at these slits, somehow this single photon seems to be able to go through both slits and then refocus itself as one spot on the screen behind. That is the first strange thing. Secondly, if you start to fire many single photons at the slits, they start to gradually build up into a pattern. And that pattern is just like the bands that you would eventually get when you shine a bright light, as in the first experiment. The bands gradually start to appear. So that is the second strange thing. Is the light either a wave or is it a particle? And it seems to be able to work in both ways when you're dealing with this experiment. In addition, if you have a detector that is focused on the slits, and it can detect which of the slits the photon has gone through, the whole thing changes, because you then get just two vertical lines of single photons that have gone through the slits. Indeed, at this atomic level, the pattern starts to be very strange indeed, and man has great difficulty in trying to interpret even just this simple experiment. Now let me make it clear here that when we're dealing at the large end, the infinite end, and right called the zero end of atomic physics, we are not dealing with a God of the gaps, because that is the idea that, oh well, we can't explain them now. In a few years' time, perhaps we will have an explanation, and therefore science will be dominant all the time, and will push those Christians back into the little tiny gaps that are remaining. We are not dealing with that situation here, because these are results that the scientists cannot even begin to interpret correctly. They are beyond their understanding. That raises the question, are we reaching perhaps the limit of scientific exploration in these two areas, the large and the small end, as we might say? Are we in fact beginning to touch the hem of God's infinite garment? If so, we need to be very careful in our approach to the limits of the infinity and the zero that we find in nature. Interestingly, a parallel can be found in mathematics. It's very easy for me to prove that 3 equals 4, if you'd like to follow in the next few steps. 3 divided by 0 equals infinity. 4 divided by 0 equals infinity. Now infinity equals infinity. Therefore, 3 over 0 equals 4 over 0. Multiply both sides by 0 and cancel out the zeros that are on each side, and you finish up with 3 equals 4. Now notice what we have done. We have strictly obeyed the rules of algebra, applied them consistently, as we would normally do in algebraic equations, and yet we still get nonsense. Why is that? Because we have treated 0 and infinity too casually. We have used them in a situation that they simply do not apply. We need to have very great care how we handle these concepts of 0 and infinity. And that would apply whether we are using them in mathematics, in our scientific endeavours and our research, and in the spiritual world. You see, many people simply do not believe that God could possibly create this world in 7 days. And what they're really doing is they're trying to bring God down to their level of understanding. They're trying to bring him down so that their minds can comprehend everything about God. But God is surely above our understanding, and he has set limits to human knowledge. There are 2 passages in the Bible in which God refuses to answer man. Job had suffered many serious problems, and in despair he turns to God and asks in chapter 31 verse 35, "Let the Almighty answer me." And then in chapter 38 verse 4, God thunders back at him and says, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations?" Similarly, in Romans 9, in verses 10 to 18, we read that Paul shows us that God has the right to choose whom he will bless. And then we get to verse 19, where he says, "One of you will say to me, 'Why does God still blame us?' And then he answers that, 'But who are you, O man, to talk back to God?'" God has made it very clear that this is his world and he is running it his way. Mankind does not fully understand him, but nevertheless he has a perfect plan and everything is going in accordance with that perfect plan. In the Westminster Catechism, Shorter Catechism, there is a definition of it says, what is God? And it gives the definition as God is infinite, eternal and unchanging in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness and truth. And I always add 2 more, in his beauty and humility. You see, man, when he rebelled and he offended an infinite God. And therefore the punishment also had to be infinite. Man could not pay, indeed he was dead in his trespasses and sin. And therefore it took the second person of the Trinity, also a perfect God, it took him to pay this infinite punishment in our place. And to those who accept Christ's death as sufficient to restore man's relationship to God, which was broken at the fall, then God promises that he will know freedom and joy in the here and now, and he also promises that with his infinite power he will ensure that they will be with him for all eternity. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you for listening.